He's only the second president in more than 100 years, if he does in fact win, to go back to the White House and serve non-consecutive terms.
What do you think of your old boss, former Vice President Mike Pence, is thinking? He did not endorse Donald Trump, and of course, famously, did his constitutional duty on January 6th to the chance of hang Mike Pence. What do you think he's thinking right now?
I think he's probably thinking about it from a policy standpoint. I mean, the campaign is over. That decision has been made by the American people. And so I think he'll look that if there's an area where they are in agreement on policy, he'll engage. If there's an area where he's in disagreement, he will decide whether he will make that known or just quietly wait and know that you've got actually another opportunity 4 years down the road, not to run, I'm not saying that, but to influence another set of policymakers.
But there is a reason that he's seen so many of the people that worked under him leave and now speak ill of him. And so what does that mean for the future of his next cabinet?
Well, I think a lot of times you have to realize how to communicate with him and also what your role is. I mean, I think this is one of the big disagreements I think we had in Washington, D.C. and with the bureaucracy in general, is to provide advice, to provide consent, to provide your best recommendation, but there's only one person who put their name on the line and was elected by the people of America to be the president of the United States.
Claire, you had a thought, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the things that a lot of people will be looking at is the military. We have a civilian-controlled military in the United States, but there is a deep ethos in the military, especially in the leadership, about the separation of politics and the military. And Trump at times tried to blur that line and was frustrated, I think, because he could not get the military to do what he thought they ought to do when they ought to do it sometimes. So I think it will be interesting to see how the Pentagon handles this, because there are so many strong leaders in our military, and they have come up through the ranks, and they have transferred their families all over the world, and they have learned every part of military leadership. And I think there could be some bumps in the road as to how he handles the military and who he puts in charge.
Well, in his first term, there were a number of administration officials who were there because they felt as though they could say no to him. They felt as though they were protecting the government. And by all accounts, this will be a very different second term. He was doing an interview with Sean Hannity, and Sean Hannity asked him if he would be a dictator, and he said only on day one. And of course, some of his supporters said, look, that was hyperbole, it was a joke. But the reality is, I think this administration will look a lot different. There will be people there who will support, and the question is how many will be able to question him, to challenge him. We know that he also has his eye on people like Governor Doug Burgum, Senator Marco Rubio, obviously Elon Musk, as we have discussed, as potential people who would return to a second administration.
To sort of put it super simply here, this is the case that Vice President Harris made for the duration of her 107-day campaign, which was that if Donald Trump gets back into office, her argument was that he would be potentially more dangerous in the first term, she said, because the people who acted as a check around him will be gone. And I think that's what we're talking about here. Who will be around him? Who will be those voices in his ear? Clearly, that is an argument that did not resonate with voters in Georgia. It did not resonate with voters in North Carolina. It did not resonate with the Latino voters that we've been talking about, et cetera. But that is the case that she had been making and was trying to make, bringing up these cabinet officials, other Republicans, people who had previously been allied with him that chose to break apart.
Did he win a mandate?
Listen, the House, the Senate is Republican now. He is on the precipice of potentially winning. Again, we have not called it, but winning Pennsylvania, which would be essentially ball game
and
for
potentially
him.
the popular vote as well.
Which for the first time, he's never had that before, right? And we don't even know, could this be a sweep of the battlegrounds? That's a huge question mark, too. So, listen, he has been very clear about his policies, the things he wants to put in place. We talked about tariffs. If he has a Republican House and Senate, suddenly, perhaps that makes it easier to find the money that he will need, the enormous amount of money to carry out those mass deportations, for example. And so there are going to be some policy implications depending on which way Congress goes.
Well, I mean, Project 2025, which the former president has disavowed, but it has to be acknowledged, has folks who have worked for him and people that he has consulted with all over it. And there's a lot of talk in that document about